Gilgo Beach, New York, December 11, 2010. A woman is walking her dog along the beach at dawn when she spots something strange. At first she thinks it's a doll, but then she realizes it's a human torso. Specifically, the upper torso of a woman wearing a long-sleeve leopard print dress. This discovery would open up a terrifying new chapter in the history of serial killers in America, one that would go unsolved for over a decade until a man named Rex Heuermann was finally arrested. This is the bizarre story of the Long Island serial killer. So to start off, let's go back to the beginning. It's all the way back to May of 1996. In May of '96, a young mother of two named Shannan went missing. She was last seen leaving her home to meet up with her boyfriend, who she had recently had a big fight with. Shannan called her sister later that day to tell her that she was going to spend the night at a friend Howe's house. But the next morning, Shannan failed to show up for work as a waitress. And after a couple days passed without her, her family began to get worried. They reported her missing, but unfortunately, despite hundreds of people searching for her body was never found. Fast forward 3 years to July of 1999. A young woman named Megan went missing after leaving her boyfriend's apartment. Her family waited a while to report her missing because they assumed that she was just having some sort of girl-ass weekend away. But they soon realized that that wasn't the case. Although police searched for Megan for months, they weren't able to find any trace of her whatsoever. Then there was Amber Costello. On November 13, 2000, Amber left her job as a waitress at Hooters in New Jersey to meet up with her boyfriend, but she never made it to his house. No one knows exactly what happened, but at some point, Amber got into a fight with her boyfriend, after which he claims that he saw her get into a pickup truck with several men inside. And that was the last time anyone ever saw her alive. Then we have Maureen Brain. Maureen was an escort who disappeared on July 13, 2002, after calling her sister to pick her up from a client's house. Her sister arrived at the client's house only to find out that Maureen was nowhere to be seen. The client told her sister that Maureen had asked him to pay her by check instead of cash. So he had written her a check for $500 and let her leave. But obviously Maureen never cashed the check, and she was never heard from again. And those are just the victims whose cases were most closely linked to the Long Island serial killer. There were many other women who either disappeared or were found dead under suspicious circumstances during the same time period. Though whether or not they were victims of the Long Island serial killer is debatable. Now, why am I telling you all this? Well, all of these women would end up being connected to each other in a very dark and sinister way, which is why it's important to their stories. But before I can tell you how, we need to talk about how all these bodies were discovered in the first place. The first few bodies were actually found by a man named John Bove in December of 2010. He was walking his dog along Gilgo Beach early in the morning when he spotted something peculiar. Like I mentioned before, at first he thought it was a doll, but he quickly realized that it was a real human torso. Specifically the top half of a woman wearing a long-sleeve leopard print dress. Soon enough, more and more bodies would be found along the same stretch of beach. All of them seemed to be women, and all of them had been wrapped in burlap and dumped there. Over the course of the next 2 months, a total of 10 bodies would be found. At first, the police didn't seem to think that any of these cases were connected. However, after they learned that many of the victims had been working as prostitutes, and that all of the bodies were found within a mile of each other, they realized that they might be dealing with a serial killer. As the investigation progressed, police were able to connect to more bodies to the Gilgo Beach Murders, bringing the total number of confirmed victims to 12. So who were these women? Well, besides the 4 that I already told you about, we have Melissa Barthelemy, who went missing in September of 2002 after leaving her boyfriend's house.
Oh.
Then there's Jessica Taylor, who was last seen in October of 2003 after getting off work as a waitress. Amber Lynn Costello, who, like I said before, was last seen getting into a pickup truck with several men inside. Megan Waterman, who disappeared after arguing with her pimp. And finally, the Jane Doe known as Peaches, who was found in April of 2011 and was identified through dental records as Barbara Cassot. Police believed that all 12 women had been killed by the same person or people, but they had absolutely no leads on who this could possibly be. Even though they put together composite sketches of what the killer might look like, nothing ever came of it. That was until May of 2016, when a woman named Valerie Mack contacted the police. You see, Valerie had seen a news story about the Gilgo Beach murders and had immediately become convinced that her cousin's former boyfriend, Cal Picosta, was the killer. When the police ran DNA tests on Mr. Picosta, they found that he was a match for some of the samples taken from the crime scenes, particularly the torso of Shannan, the first victim. But even though this was definitely a lead, it turned out to be a dead end, because Michael Picosta had died by suicide in 2012. It was until over 5 years later, in July of 2022, that police finally caught a break in the case. A burner phone that was found near one of the crime scenes was linked to a man named Rex Heuermann, who was a married architect living in Massapequa Park, New York. Police found out that Mr. Heuermann had been having an affair with one of the victims, Melissa Barthélemy, and that he had been communicating with some of the others through Craigslist. On July 13, 2022, after being on the FBI's radar for a little while, a team of 100 officers descended upon Mr. Heuermann's house. They searched the property and soon found evidence that they believed linked him to the crimes. They then took him into custody and charged him with the murders of Melissa Barthélemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello. He was also the prime suspect in the murder of Maureen Brain, although he hasn't yet been formally charged in that case. Mr. Heuermann pleaded not guilty to all charges against him. But even if he did commit these horrific acts, why? Unfortunately, we don't know yet because he's yet to admit to anything. In fact, he's so elusive that he hasn't even given any interview since being arrested, which makes me think that we may never really know why he did what he did. What we do know, however, is that Mr. Heuermann was a frequent visitor to the very same Gilgo Beach where all of the women's bodies were found. And not only does he live about 20 minutes away from where the bodies were found, he was also in the same business as the killer. Like I mentioned before, Mr. Heuermann was an architect, whereas the killer apparently used a lot of burlap in wrapping the bodies, which is typically used in construction. Coincidence? I don't think so. But even though Mr. Heuermann is obviously guilty, or at least seems guilty, there are still many questions that remain unanswered. For example, even though the press has dubbed this case the Long Island serial killer case, we don't know for sure if Mr. Heuermann acted alone. It's possible that there was more than one perpetrator, but for whatever reason, they were never caught. Then what about the other victims? We know that Mr. Heuermann was definitely involved with at least 3 of the women, but we don't know if he was responsible for killing all of them. Speaking of which, how did he kill them? It's obvious that he killed them in a very violent way, but exactly how he did it remains a mystery. And finally, why? Like I said before, Mr. Heuermann isn't talking, so we simply don't know why he did what he did, and maybe we're not supposed to know. What do you think? Let me know down in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to leave it a like and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any of my videos. Thank you for watching.